I have an idea. Cool. I've been signed out because I'm currently signed in on another device. It just booted me. Hey, everybody. I am hoping to share my screen with you. Um, this one here. And I don't know if out there in Facebook land you can see me, but hopefully you can, and hopefully you can hear me. So I have got, there I am. Yay. So I've got over here Darren from Oliver Pluff and Company. And down here, I've got Mara, who is the Archaeology Lab Supervisor at the George Washington Foundation, which administrates George Washington's Ferry Farm and Kenmore, historic Kenmore in Fredericksburg, Virginia. So really sorry about the technical difficulties, everybody. Trust me, it's been a nightmare. We're not going to go into what just happened, but here we are. Hopefully you can hear me. Hopefully you can see my screen. And hopefully you can hear these folks. So I'm going to let them all say hello, and hopefully we can share a little bit here. So let's start with Darren and then Mara and see if folks can hear us out there in Facebook land.
Hi, I'm Darren Hartford. I'm the owner of Oliver Pluff Company. We do recreate historic beverages like teas, coffees, and cacao, as well as coffee. And we're out of Charleston, South Carolina.
Great.
Mara's got a lot more interesting gigs.
Thanks.
How about that? I'm Mara Kaktins, the Archaeology Lab Manager for the George Washington Foundation. I work at Ferry Farm, which is George Washington's boyhood home, and we've been doing excavations there for decades now. So yeah, we're really happy to be here, Karen. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate you being here, and thank you for bearing with me. It has been almost 20 minutes, 25 minutes now that we've been trying to get this set up. So thanks. I'm sorry. This would normally be the time we were almost done. So my apologies. So what I wanted to do today was talk a little bit about some of the non-alcoholic beverages of the American Revolution, and I was hoping to get your all's expertise on that and learn a little bit. And forgive me here, friends, this screen that I'm sharing with you, I'm going to exit full screen and move some windows over. Don't mind me. So I have some notes here that I need to move so that I can look at them with you. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit today about coffee, tea, and chocolate, sort of the non-alcoholic fuels of the Revolution. And so everybody knows certain things about the American Revolution, and everybody knows certain things about tea consumption and a little teeny bit about coffee, and I'm going to wager not very much about chocolate. So, if we could start with a little bit of tea. Tea comes into the European world, well, really all three of these beverages come into the European world in the 17th century, all sort of around the same time. Um, so if we can talk a little bit about tea, especially here in the British colonies, if anyone wants to give that a whirl.
I think you're throwing a softball my way on that one.
There you go.
So tea and coffee, as Karen said, they both show up on the scene about the same time. Thanks to the Dutch for both. Dutch explorers as well as the Portuguese before them. Tea, coffee, there's a great book out there called The History of the World in Six Glasses. And of that, they talk about tea and coffee and how they both are really symptomatic or emblematic of the explorers, Western explorers, and that spirit of exploration, where the Ottoman Empire wouldn't allow Europeans to go via land routes to explore what was to the east. They did by sailing vessels. So the Portuguese went to the Dutch discovered mocha in Yemen, the port, where the coffee was king, Ethiopian coffee. That's what they brought back with them. They stole the beans as well eventually, and took them with them to one of their outposts in Indonesia, Java. So Java beans for coffee, that's where that comes from. And while they went out there in Indonesia as well, they followed the Portuguese into Japan, and King discovered this drink called tea, cha, was how it was first described, and the ceremonies that went with it. They were thrown out of Japan and ended up getting their supplies back from China on tea, and they brought it back to Europe. First coffee and tea houses both started about the same time, late 1670s or so. I think was the first evidence of it. Even in the colonies, there were by late 1600s there were coffee houses. A coffee house was a man's domain. No women allowed. They talked politics. At one point in time, Charles II closed down coffee houses because they were sedition in England. But tea, Charles II also married Catherine, Portuguese, Braganza, and she loved tea. And thanks to Catherine, tea became a craze. It was a birthday product where, for the English, the Queen loved it. Everyone wanted to drink it. Started at the nobles and worked its way down into every person's life. And eventually, the East Indian Company replaced the Dutch East India Company, the British East India Company, and so they started getting a lock hold after the British beat the Dutch or replaced the Dutch on the high seas. They took tea, and everyone wanted tea. And tea, the first tea houses were actually both women. Women were actually involved in this, and tea was drank in homes where the lady of the house would keep the key to the tea chest, because tea was kind of a expensive commodity. And there are books out there where they talk about, there you go.
See, there's a latchet for a lock, everybody. I don't know. I'm backwards.
You can see it's not a huge chest. It's just that's about how much they could afford at the time. Even though tea price by the Revolutionary period can come way down in price. The two popular teas, green tea, I've read it might be just anecdotal, that green tea was considered prized by the Chinese, so they would allow the Europeans to buy it, but they really protected green tea, the better green tea. There you go. Gunpowder is a tightly rolled, pan-fried green tea. That also comes from the leaves similar to a young hyson. So, tea leaf, which
I don't have my container for young hyson because I put it all into a caddy. So I realized that I don't have my container for my young hyson anymore. Sorry.
So the American colonies, mostly coming from Britain, they adopted this and they really brought in the tea as well. But they're drinking in the morning and they're drinking in the evening. And tea parties in the evening were just good old parties. They were family fun. Might have been some alcohol involved in those as well. Games, and just it was a social gathering. That's tea in the culture. It just was one of those. It brought people together. It was how they bonded and joined. I know Darren was stressing a little bit about this whole video as she started, but there's no stress in tea.
Appreciate that.
Cheers to that.
And I have a question for Mara. Now, something that Darren said was that tea, as it becomes sort of a more feminine thing, that women are in tea houses and holding tea parties, and it was made popular by women. And so then we have this entire phenomenon of tea equipage coming in, tablewares, and all of these different objects, and they show up in the archaeological record, right? So can you tell us a little bit about a Keepage? Because the stuff that I had on the table that I wanted to show everybody can now not be seen. Plus, you have the real stuff. My stuff is all repro or historic anyway. You've got the real archaeological stuff, so.
But you have the whole stuff. I've got tiny little pieces, which I'm happy to show. You're going to have to use your imagination if you're not an archaeologist or a master, puzzle
I
person.
have like some silver.
Oh, nice.
My ceramic tea bowls are still downstairs. Maybe we can retrieve them at some point. But anyway.
All my repros are at my office, which is now 40 minutes away from where I am at home. But I do have some artifacts here, and yes, you're absolutely right. Tea becomes incredibly engendered and becomes associated with, femininity. And we've all heard about the tea ceremony. So especially for the gentry class and at Ferry Farm, with the Washington family, we're dealing with a family that is in the gentry. They're not, the 1%. They're more like the lower 10%, but they still have some really fancy tea wares. And it's not just about knowing how to serve tea, but that's a huge part of it. It's how you serve the tea, how you prepare the tea, the conversation that you have during the tea. But there's also basically conspicuous consumption, showing off your fancy tea wares. And a lot of this involves not just the cups and saucers, but specialized vessels. So, for instance, a tea canister or a patch stand, which is a teapot stand. This is completely and totally unnecessary. It just elevates the teapot to a greater height so you can enjoy it more, because the teapot, as you know, is the crown jewel of the tea ceremony. So I've got a couple examples here. We just did a ceramic mending site of all the porcelains that are associated with the Washington family at Ferry Farm. And what we found was really interesting. Mary Washington, George's mother, because Ferry Farm is really, George is a big part of Ferry Farm, but this is really the story of Mary Washington and the consumer choices she makes, which reflect her gentility, because she's trying to really show how civilized they are, especially she's a widow. She has 5 kids to raise to adulthood, and she wants to set them off on the right foot. So she starts serving tea in her household, and initially she's going to be the one that's serving it. She's the one who's pouring the tea. However, in the, backstage are all of her enslaved individuals that are helping her out. They're boiling the water, they're cleaning the tea table whenever it's done, they're cleaning the tea wares and then storing them and then getting them out for the next ceremony. So that's something really important to keep in mind. But I have some artifacts here, if you don't mind me showing you, Karen.
Please.
And everybody. All right. So I know this doesn't look like much, but this is part of a tea canister. It's a straight-sided vessel, which is why we know what it is. I know, like I said, it doesn't look like much. Hand-painted. It's Chinese export porcelain. So Darren was talking about China being a big influencer here. So, serving your tea from Chinese export porcelain is basically the best way you can present your tea if you're of the gentility. So this is hand-painted. It's a tree motif. These little pom-poms you see, they're actually part of a larger tree. And a tea canister is, again, something that wasn't necessary. This is a presentation thing. You can store tea in other ways, see? So this would be out so that people could see the canister. And being seen was just as important as its use, even more so. Like I said, conspicuous consumption. So, you're really trying to show off during the tea ceremony. This is the time, even more so than dinner. The tea ceremony is when you can really, really show off. Here's some of a saucer, very finely painted. I know it's hard to tell from the pictures, the screen, but this is hand painted and gilded. So that's like high quality porcelain, like seriously, like best of that. And in some cases, these vessels are painted with a brush that's just 1 or 2 hairs. That's it. They're so detailed. And another interesting thing about the Washington porcelain collection is that we have pretty much only teawares, no tablewares in porcelain.
Really?
Yeah, I know. That's really kind of it surprised me too. So there's no plates, no tureens, no serving bowls, nothing like that. It's all teawares. So the money that they're choosing to sink into porcelain, they're putting into the tea ceremony,
Sure.
not to dinner.
Now, here at Middleton Place, we have a whole mess of porcelain. It's Chinese hard paste, it's French hard paste, and it's English soft paste. And it ranges the gamut, but the Middleton family definitely would have been kind of more in that upper 1% with 19 plantations. So the idea of silver teawares, finely potted porcelain teawares, and then, of course, an entire service of tableware. All of this would have been within the purview of the Middleton family. So it's interesting to look at sort of not just the differences in region, but even a very small, because I don't think that the economic difference between the Washington family and the Middletons is all that great, really. But where they're choosing to spend their money is certainly interesting. And this is all, by the way, everybody, sort of prior to the American Revolution. So what happens, Darren, when we start to hear rumblings of rebellion? And where do those start?
So actually, the Sons of Liberty started in a coffee house, the Green Dragon Tavern coffee house in Boston. Was where Sons of Liberty met. And I find it, so the tea, everyone knows the Tea Act, they say, well, you're against the taxes of tea. It's actually going to reduce the cost of tea. 90% of the tea, I've read 90% of the tea consumed in America, pre-revolutionary America, was smuggled tea. Because they were avoiding using the East Indian Tea Company, and they wanted to do away with that and just get the tea as cheap as they could without any of the taxes on it. But obviously that led to more costs. So when the Tea Act was enforced, again, Britain's attempt, England's attempt to recoup some of the money it spent on the 7-Year War, French-Indian War, as we call it here, they kept trying to find ways to tax that the colonists would accept. That wasn't going to happen. So the Tea Act was supposed to be great. Just use this company. They'll have all the tea. We'll flood the market. We'll get cheaper tea. Everyone wins. They didn't want to use that. And so that was another protest. As the Sons of Liberty spread throughout the colonies, they started having this in this November and December. They knew the tea ships were coming based on the schedules. And they started planning on what are they going to do about it. And Charleston was the first to have a tea party act in December 3rd. We beat Boston by 13 days.
Yeah, wait, let's say that again. If you didn't know, everybody, Boston wasn't the only tea party right before the Revolution. Who was first?
Charleston.
Charleston, that's right. All right, just to let y'all know.
But we were a little more civilized than Boston. We didn't throw the tea in the harbor. They put it into the exchange. They just offloaded it off the vessel and put it in the exchange. And then they found out about Boston and Philadelphia and New York, where they're actually throwing the tea in the harbor. And they're like, oh, we got to get that right. So the next year, there's the second Charleston Tea Party, where they actually threw it in the harbor. But it was all about, hey, not wanting taxation without representation. And that was kind of the whole start, the whole discussion of it. And throwing tea out and going back to coffee instead. That was kind of a mixed success. Yes, it happened during the Revolutionary War, but you also know that George Washington and John Adams and Thomas Jefferson all loved tea, and they all wanted it as soon as they could get it, as soon after the war.
Sure, I mean, I would argue that the tea never really went anywhere. The tea that they're dumping in the harbor doesn't belong to them. It's coming right off the merchant ship. The tea that's in their homes, they just put it away for a little bit, right? I'm going to be a patriot and drink something else for a while And then when all of this settles down, we'll reintroduce tea, which did in fact happen into the 19th century. Tea becomes probably the most popular hot beverage again, even here in America. So just so that y'all know, coffee is definitely the Patriots' beverage, but tea never really went anywhere. It just got put away for a little while.
And coffee was popular, but it's kind of one of those things. Mara, you have all those wonderful tea sets. Do you have any coffee? There's no coffee
No.
ceremony, but you have something.
Yes, I do. Thank you for asking, Darren. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I definitely have coffee cups from Ferry Farm. I have them here. And they're in Augustine, Washington. That's George Washington's father. It's in his probate inventory, which I can quote to you, actually, as I've written down here. So in his probate inventory, we have china pieces listed are teapots, slop bowls, milk pots, sugar dishes, plates, coffee cups, and a teapot stand. So, and we do have now coffee cups and chocolate cups are they look very similar. In fact, I don't know that archaeologically you can distinguish them, but they tend to be more straight-sided, whereas a teacup is more bowl-shaped. So probably the best example I have is this guy here, which is also featured on our blog. And you can see it's straight-sided, not curved, really.
And nobody get mad at me as I share my screen here. I actually have an image from their blog.
Yay! Yeah, Lives and Legacies. We were very happy with our blog. We like it a lot. So we have at least 3 coffee cups, and they match. They have a matching motif, which is next level because matching table and teawares weren't really a thing in the mid-18th century when George Washington was living at Ferry Farm. Yeah, I mean, you could buy like cups and saucers that matched, but really like the idea of having an entire table that had matching ceramics was completely foreign. This is pre-industrialization. So, people bought a teapot that didn't necessarily match their cups and serving bowls that didn't necessarily match their plates. An mid-18th century tea table or dinner table would have lots of different colors, ceramic and glass and silver types. It'd be much more colorful and varied.
And is it true that this here, you have a silver coffee pot at either Ferry Farm or Kenmore?
We have silver at Kenmore, but it's not necessarily related to the Washingtons. We haven't found any evidence of archaeologically at Ferry Farm of silver, which is not unusual because it was all recycled. And if it for any reason became too worn to use or broke, which would be very difficult to break a silver teapot. So we think that we probably had mostly porcelain teawares because anything silver would have shown up in the probate inventory. And after Augustine Washington's death, Mary Washington would not have been able to afford silver. Now, if you're thinking about silver teawares, Betty Washington, George Washington's sister, his only surviving sister, so she was the only daughter in the household. She's coming of age, and her uncle, Joseph Ball, Mary's brother, sends her a silver tea set from England. And this is a way to sort of impart upon her the tools with which to learn the tea ceremony. It's very important for Betty to learn how to make and serve tea in terms of, and this is so outdated by, today's standards, but to get a good husband.
Sure.
And at 17, she does. She marries a widower, Fielding Lewis, and she doesn't just have a silver tea set that she gets from her uncle. She also has monogrammed pewter teaspoons. It may have been a whole set, we don't know. But archaeologically at Ferry Farm, we have a pewter teaspoon, which is monogrammed with her initials, BW.
Fantastic.
So this kind of speaks to her training in this respect and how important it was for her to learn this, to get a guy.
Sure. And that's an interesting contrast because with our museum, it's not that we don't have silver and porcelain teawares, but that's not necessarily, we know that Arthur Middleton and his wife Mary Izard Middleton went on the grand tour of Europe after they were married, and they came home with a firstborn child, and also a whole mess of silver. And it's all got the family crest on it, and it's all got the family coat of arms, and it's beautiful. And it's things like candlesticks and a beautiful apern and a cake basket. And I'm not entirely sure that they had teawares in silver either. Theirs might have been porcelain. So, as we display our collections of serving pieces and dining pieces, there's not really tea to be seen on the table because it's its whole own separate, social custom. Guys, we do have some questions. So, we have a question about, is there a difference between household tea and high tea? I think that depends on what continent you're on. I think, Darren, do you have some insight
Yeah.
about that?
I would agree with that assessment. I think high tea is more of an English concept and probably more 19th century than 18th century type of discussion. As tea becomes more and more popular in England at the time, and then but there was afternoon tea.
Right.
Breakfast tea and then afternoon tea, which is anywhere between 2 and 5 o'clock, even in the colonies.
Well, and that feeds into our next question, which was, when did coffee become associated with the morning and as a breakfast beverage? And actually, that's a good question for chocolate too. We haven't addressed chocolate yet, but chocolate was really understood to be a morning drink, a breakfast drink. So, do we have any insight, either one of you, about how these beverages became associated with morning drinks as opposed to afternoon or evening drinks? I know
Well,
that it's said that George Washington drank chocolate every morning, didn't he?
right. Yeah, that's research that comes out of Mount Vernon, and that seems to be, absolutely correct. But I will say that before Betty Washington's marriage, her mother Mary buys. Let me see how much chocolate that is. Um, it's a lot. She buys a lot of chocolate before. 2 pounds of chocolate prior to Betty's wedding.
Hmm.
So part of her wedding ceremony involved serving chocolate. The drink, obviously, is what we're talking about. So, and I don't think that would have been served during the morning. So, perhaps later on it traditionally became a morning beverage. But, there's evidence at Ferry Farm that it was also just sort of an indulgence.
I mean, I suspect that this comes from the idea of these drinks, because all of them were served in coffee houses, right? So these drinks moving out of the coffee house and into the home, and becoming a home practice. Um, and then we had a question about, how do you know that the cup was used for coffee and not tea? And Mara, I'm going to see if I can, and forgive me again, folks, because the screen is going to pop up on the one I'm sharing with you, and I'll just move it. But I'm going to pull up Ferry Farm's blog, Lives and Legacies, and I will show you one of their teacups. And while I'm pulling that up so that we can see the teacup and the coffee cup side by side, can we talk a little bit about how coffee is prepared when people are buying coffee? Mara, when Betty Washington is buying coffee, or when the Middletons might buy coffee, how does that come? Are they buying bags of ground coffee? I mean, Darren, maybe you can talk to this too, but if you guys can sort of give us some information about how coffee comes, how it's being prepared, and who's doing that.
Yeah, so I mean, you have to think about how it's being shipped and where it's coming from. So, in this day and age, I can order, green coffee beans from Amazon and get them in a few days. Well, maybe not now because it's not considered essential, but you know, where the coffee is coming from is far away. So you don't want to grind it up beforehand. It's going to be whole bean, probably roasted, because green has a shorter shelf life, I would think. Maybe Darren can speak a little bit better to that.
It would be green beans that people would be buying, and they would roast them for the commoner. They'd be roasted in a spider, cast iron skillet. So that's where the roast would occur. Coffee grinders were actually common. The like a spice grinder but made specifically for coffee were relatively common in the early 1700s.
So would the merchants, because I'm learning stuff too, this is great. So if the merchants were getting, coffee beans, would they sometimes grind it for their customers as a convenience? Do you think most of it was being ground at home?
Most of it ground at home.
Cool.
So it'd be prepared with an eggshell in, throw the coffee in the bottom of the pot, put the water, boil it, and then there's I've seen some whole discussions about how long you boil the coffee before it turns bad, and you put the eggshell in there to get the grounds to sink to the bottom on that. So that was kind of the traditional way they did it, was to put it in, and then some started using muslin bags to keep the grounds as they steeped it.
And so for the patriotic folks here in the South, like the Arthur Middletons of the world, y'all know very well that the Arthur Middletons of the world are not the ones who are receiving this coffee and grinding it, and preparing it, roasting it, and then preparing it. It is most certainly the enslaved workers here who are stewards to the family in some capacity or other, whether it's specifically somebody whose job is to be a cook or whether it's somebody who is a manservant or a lady's maid. It is certainly the enslaved workers here who are preparing these beverages. And so if y'all take a look at the screen, those of you who are on Facebook with us, I have put up the coffee cup on the top left-hand side of the screen, and I've put the teacup on the bottom so you can see what Mara was talking about, the handleless teacup, which is more bowl-shaped, and then the straight-sided coffee or chocolate cup with a handle. So Mara, I'm sure you can talk a little bit more about that, but that's what they're seeing on the screen, a coffee or chocolate cup on top, and then the blue and white teacup on the bottom.
And that was a great question, by the way, because nowadays I would drink coffee out of this same mug that I'm drinking tea out of, although the traditional coffee cup, has a straight side. The cups that I drink tea out of are more bulbous for some reason, like it just feels right. But that being said, there's nothing to say that these cups weren't interchangeable. This is just how they were marketed and how they would be inventoried. So again, the probate inventory for Augusta and Washington states there are coffee cups and teacups, which means that the shapes were differentiated. And especially in the gentry class, they would pay more attention to different, vessels for specific purposes, because this shows more, refinement and everything. And then there's also, the slop bowls that go along with it. But definitely the coffee cups and chocolate cups were more straight-sided. The teacups tended to be bowl-shaped, usually handleless, but, not necessarily. And it was important to draw that distinction if you were trying to, show how civilized you were. It's a weird way to put it.
Right.
But it's just conspicuous consumption. You can drink tea and coffee out of the same cups. It doesn't matter. I mean, let's face it. And in fact, if we switch to the other end of the economic scale, I did an excavation, Karen, as you know, the almshouse in Philadelphia, 1732 to 1767 was when they were in operation. And speaking to the ubiquitousness of tea and also chocolate and coffee, there was tea equipage that I excavated from that quite a bit, actually. And when I looked at the documentary record, the order books, and the daily log for the almshouse, every single inmate, and they were inmates, they were not allowed to come and go as they pleased, got a serving of tea or coffee or chocolate every day. It would be considered inhumane to not give them that, even though, these are the poorest people in Philadelphia. And also, as a brief aside, if you did extra work at the almshouse, you got a serving, a gill of whiskey.
Right on. That's cool.
And if you were done, you got the good whiskey. So.
Awesome. I love it. That's a conversation for another day. We'll definitely bring that back for another day. But speaking of the different vessels, of course, then there's the chocolate pot, which is conspicuous itself because it looks like a coffee pot, not so much like a teapot. It looks like a coffee pot, but it's got the hole in the top because it's got that wooden rod and the mixing of the chocolate. Um, Chocolate was prepared a different way from tea. Tea is an infusion, right? And so is coffee if it's prepared the right way, according to the 18th century. But chocolate is melted into either water or milk. And I did have a point. My point there was that that wasn't the only way, though, that cocoa was consumed. And in fact, Oliver Pluff makes a tea out of cacao shell. So, Darren, can you tell us a little bit about this?
So there is record for George Washington sending a note with everything else he has going on in the 1770s to the 1780s. And send a note to his merchant for 20 pounds of shell of chocolate, just the shell, cacao shell. And Martha, that was what she drank for breakfast. So it has the flavor and aroma of chocolate, but it doesn't have caffeine and it doesn't have calories.
Doesn't
So
have calories, that's big.
Now, if you doctor it with a little, I doctor it with a little maple syrup and a little milk, just to give it a little rich.
Now, that's something too, the sweetening it. I'm sorry to cut you off, Mara. Go ahead.
Take my money, please.
Well, I mean, there's some suggestion in some of the research about coffee, tea, and chocolate that the reason that chocolate became popular quickly is because a lot of the recipes for preparing a chocolate drink automatically included sugar, whereas all three of these beverages alone are really quite bitter. And so there is, of course, that tradition of putting sugar into tea, and sugar being sort of a novelty item or an item that not everybody can necessarily access. So, how are we seeing sugar play into these beverages and their consumption and then their accessibility? Anybody have any? I mean,
Sugar was under lock and key, just
yeah.
like the spices and the tea. And again, the lady of the household would have those keys. So, and there were different grades of sugar. You had the really nice sugar, but then you had the opposite end. So most households would be able to afford at least some type of sugar. It would have been darker if, you couldn't afford, really good sugar. The nicest stuff was, the whitest, the purest, the most refined.
Sure.
And the other end would be, like brown sugar, but with more nasty stuff in it that didn't taste so good. That's another conversation for another time, but sugar was fine. Gross. Really gross.
Yeah. So how does this, is it really just about the taxes? Because there was a Sugar Act too. Is it really, do we think, just about the taxes that we see coffee and chocolate becoming sort of the drinks of patriotism, or does it have to do with the location of those coffee houses as well? Or rather, not the location, but the fact that, coffee houses are serving drinks that are stimulants as opposed to taverns, which are selling drinks that are intoxicants. And so, is there something there in terms of philosophy and civilized conversation versus angry potential brawling?
I would say that, and I think there have been some various books on it, that tea and coffee, caffeine, it really set up the whole Industrial Revolution. And not just the American Revolution, but the idea that when you get up in the morning, instead of having ale or a mead, something that would dull the thoughts, you'd have a stimulant, something that would, get you going, thinking about Thomas Jefferson drank tea. Hopefully that was what he was drinking when he wrote the Declaration, but who knows? He might have been, enjoying his Madeira.
I'm good with that too. We are going to have a whole other session on Madeira, so Y'all let me know if you want to come back for that. But
I'd love to.
yeah.
Only if we can do it after this whole thing so we can actually enjoy some.
Oh, we can just write on camera and then we'll, Anyway, let me not say that. So it's interesting, though, that you say that, Darren, because some of the original usages for tea before it became this huge social situation were often medicinal, right? We're talking about tinctures for medicine.
The first apothecaries were the first to carry this new Chinese magic vessel. Now in England, it was, hey, this is a great thing. Might have had to do with the British East India Company and its control over British politics and British commerce. But in Germany and Holland, they were worried that tea was not good for you, that it would lead to early aging. And so those Germany kept with coffee and chocolate, and England said, hey, no, this will, will brighten the thoughts and give you life to your step and other sort of betterments to your whole body in the course of drinking tea.
Yeah.
So
Well, and
the British end up, becoming rulers of the world. Obviously, they had.
Well, it's interesting. I have a pamphlet and I just have a printed copy of it, but this is in the public record because it's from 1722, so you can find it on Google Books, and we'll make sure everybody who's watching to put this on the Plugged Into History portal on Middleton Place's website. But it's discussing in 1722 the effects of drinking tea, chocolate, and coffee. And it's kind of funny because the individual who is writing this describes coffee, describes chocolate, and describes tea. And then it says, well, if you're going to go ahead and drink this in the morning, we really can't recommend that because physicians inquiring why there are so many diseases, obstructions, diseases of the spleen, vapors, why are these more frequent than before? They ascribe the cause to flatulencies not seasonably vented from the use of tea, coffee, and chocolate, superseding the ancient custom of good beer with toast and nutmeg for breakfast in a morning. So I don't know if this particular pamphlet, maybe it was written by a brewer. I don't know, actually. I know where it was printed in London and I know by whom. Um, but it's really interesting that it talks about tea, coffee, and chocolate are not good for breakfast. You shouldn't be doing that at all. And you should drink a good beer with toast and nutmeg, just like we've always done it. So I thought that was so strange because obviously by 20 or 50 years later, that's certainly far out of fashion, and tea, coffee, and chocolate are the thing. Um, I got one more quick question, but we are getting on in time here, so let me ask this one more quick question, and it's addressed to the Middleton family, but I really think this would be anybody who is purchasing tea in the 18th century. Would the Middletons drink all three, tea, coffee, and cocoa, with milk? Or would tea be with a slice of lemon, coffee strong with espresso style? And do you put milk in the cup first before pouring in the boiling tea? So I don't know of any American colonial practice where tea is drunk with milk. It's chocolate with milk, coffee alone, and tea alone with boiling water. Would you all agree? Have you found the same?
I'm going to kick that one over to Darren.
They don't talk about how they make it over there in Ferry Farm in Kenmore.
Not as much. We tend to focus on the material culture
Sure.
of tea because we don't have any documentary evidence of exactly how they were, what they were putting in the tea. We don't have any
Sure.
recipes from them, for instance. We tend to go with genre paintings a lot whenever we're observing the actual, how it would have looked. So yeah, I don't know if Darren has anything more to add to that.
I think in Euchre's book all about tea, he mentions something that tea and lemon wasn't, tea and citrus was not really a thing in the 1700s. It was, citrus was used in punches, but not in tea. But sugar was, and I want to say milk was, but milk might have been into the 1800s when they started doing that.
And spices went into chocolate
Yes.
drink.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was
Nutmeg,
another
cinnamon, pepper.
hot commodity for sure.
And in some of the research I've done, and folks, if you're really interested in this, again, we'll put some links up on Middleton Place's website, but there's a lot on the website called the Journal of the American Revolution, and some other 18th century blogs that have found primary source recipes. And those include the way to brew proper tea, the way to properly brew coffee and chocolate. So chocolate gets melted and then put into milk. But the prescribed way to make coffee is that you grind up your roasted beans, you put them in the cup, and then you pour the boiling water onto them, because if you end up boiling the mixture with the coffee bean in it, it turns it sour or flat. So the suggestion is to boil the water first, take it off the heat, and then pour it over the coffee grounds. Not unlike we do today. But there's one more thing. There's one more thing that I do want to say, and this was supposed to be in my window the whole time. And Kim, if you're out there, I'm terribly sorry that I couldn't get it in my background. But folks, this is a great book. It's called Tea in 18th Century America. And Kim Walters has done incredible research. This thing is chock full of primary sources for tea ceremony. So if this is something that you want to learn in depth about, this high status tea ceremony, things that the Middletons would have been participating in for sure, that the Washingtons were participating in. This is really the book for you. She tells you not only how the folks in the 18th century in the colonies were doing this, but she gives you information on how to create it yourself, including diagrams and including food, because we didn't talk about food in terms of tea ceremony, but pretty much every tea that was given, every tea party, every tea ceremony that was given would include food. And so she's even got recipes in the back. But here are some of her, for example, I don't know how well that's going to come out, but there is one of her diagrams for how to lay out a table. So tea in the 18th century America, you can find it on Sign of the Gray Horse. I encourage you to Google Sign of the Gray Horse on Etsy and you can find it. And then once you learn how to do that tea ceremony, you should most definitely use Oliver Pluff tea. Definitely use Oliver Pluff's tea to have your tea ceremony, please. And so I would like to thank you, Mara, thank you, Darren, for visiting with us today. And I'd really like for you both to take just a minute, and we can start with you, Mara, because you're giant on my screen right now. Can you just talk a little bit, just one more quick moment about George Washington Foundation, how people can find Ferry Farm and Historic Kenmore online and the Lives and Legacies blog? And then Darren, if you could once again tell us about Oliver Pluff and Company and where we can find your products, besides here at Middleton Place. So go for it, Mara.
Yeah, the George Washington Foundation, as you stated earlier, Karen manages two properties. Kenmore, that's the house of Betty Washington, George Washington's sister. That's in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And I work at Ferry Farm. That's the boyhood home of George Washington. It's his formative years where he's learning to be a gentleman and everything. And we're an archaeological park, but we also have reconstructed the Washington House um, using historical and archaeological evidence. And once this whole pandemic thing is over, you should definitely come visit us. It's especially great for families because unlike a lot of historic museums, it's a reconstructed house. You can go in there, you can touch everything, you can lay on the beds, you can sit on the chairs, you can pick up the cups, everything like that. So your kids can crawl all over the place. I have a 3.5-year-old. He loves it, let me tell you. So our website is kenmore.org, and our blog is Lives and Legacies. And thank you very much, Karen, for having me. This has
Of
been a real
course.
treat.
Thanks for joining us. Darren?
And Mara, thanks so much for taking part. Karen, thanks for the invite. You can find Oliver Pluff at oliverpluff.com. But what I would really like to suggest to folks is these foundations, whether it's Middleton Place, whether it's Ferry Farms, and everything, nonprofits, right now, there are no visitors to those places. They make their money through visitors. They make how they're able to offer you that glimpse into history is by you being there and by you giving money. Great. Go to oliverpluff.com, buy my tea. I would prefer go to their website, you visit them when you can, you spend your money there. Because they're not going to be able to stick around if we don't keep supporting. So please do that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Darren. We appreciate it. And we're really fortunate here at Middleton Place. Oliver Pluff has worked with us. So this is Yaupon tea. This is one of the herbals. And you can see there, it's a Middleton Place label. Oliver Pluff has worked with us to create a label with our iconic house museum. So Oliver Pluff, y'all have been an incredible partner, and we're just so grateful for you. So thank you. Thank you very much for saying that. We appreciate it. Thanks to everybody who's stuck with us. Thanks for bearing with me through the technical difficulties. Every time we do this, we learn something. So I promise, even though I tried out this tech earlier this week, it didn't work out for me. We got it figured out. And so I hope to have you both back again for future conversations. And thanks everybody for supporting Middleton Place. If you'd like to engage with what Darren has suggested, you can go to middletonplace.org/donate and kenmore.org. And we really appreciate it. So thank you all so much. Thanks for being here. Thanks, Mara and Darren. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you.